During this panel, we will talk about how did we get here? What are the real causes of these escalations? Has the EU been an effective mediator? And how successful has actually the EU been in normalizing these talks, given that these escalations happen in the backdrop of the Brussels and Ohrid agreement that were accepted verbally earlier this year? But most importantly, we will talk about how to get out of this political conundrum and how to prevent any escalations going forward. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today, and to start this conversation, we have His Excellency Mr. Ilir Duguli, who currently serves as Ambassador of Kosovo in the United States and has previously served as Ambassador to Turkey and as Ambassador to Sweden, amongst other things. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Oh, I mean, indeed, we do have an unenviable situation now due to disturbing violence and other dangerous acts with the aim of undermining peace and stability and undermining the existence of the Republic of Kosovo. You see, what we have been witnessing during the last couple of weeks is part of Serbia's broader strategy to instigate violence, to provoke unrest, and to cause instability. And with that strategy, with that sort of a mindset, with such goals, it is always possible to find excuses. One day, it is the start of a long overdue implementation of license plates regime. The other time, it's about the arrest of a suspected criminal, or when some anti-corruption investigation is initiated, or when a criminal smuggling network is dismantled, so on and so forth. You name it, basically. As we have seen, the latest pretext is now the simple administration of municipal election results. As you know, following elections of April 23rd, and inauguration of newly elected mayors, Serbia has mobilized its illegal structures to stage violent protests, to target institutions, to target police, members of police, private citizens, KFOR soldiers, of whom over 40 were injured, and especially journalists. Serbia's president has openly encouraged such attacks by labeling the presence of journalists in the northern part of our country as a provocation. Abduction of 3 members of Kosovo police on June 14th is another episode in the long list of such actions. Now, aside from being an attack against 3 innocent individuals doing their jobs, 3 professional members of police, border police unit, aside from being an assault against their human dignity, this is also an act of aggression against the sovereign and independent country. As such, it really violates some basic principles of international law. It also violates documents that Serbia has accepted, admitted, signed in the time frame of the last quarter of a century, from military technical agreement, or Kosovo agreement as it is known, of June 1999, to the latest basic treaty or agreement on the path to normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, signed or accepted, agreed to in Brussels and Ohrid in February and March of this year. Now, well-rehearsed propaganda Serbia's authorities painted several very inconsistent narratives about this forcible abduction of Kosovo police members. They portrayed it as allegedly Kosovo's special unit ventured to invade the territory of Serbia. As evidence, they used the fact that these 3 elderly individuals were in possession of standard weapons, maps, and GPS. All these routine part of any patrol unit. Whereas in essence, this act appears to be revenge against Kosovo police who are doing their job in fighting crime. Serbia's choice of timing makes it clear that this was a retribution for Kosovo's recent arrest of 3 individuals with a long track record of criminal activities, among others responsible for violence against NATO troops on May 29th. So any rule of law decision from dismantling drug labs operated by individual who happens to be associated with unrest is not only disputed, it is vehemently opposed, and then it is abused by Serbia to stoke fear among Kosovo's Serbian population. As a consequence, ringleaders closely linked with the Serbian regime exercise control over politics, business, and criminal activities in this part of the territory, thus keeping the entire population hostage, basically. On the other hand, of course, all evidence unmistakably has shown that this attack, that forcible abduction, was carried out inside the territory of Kosovo, well within the territory of Kosovo. It was planned and it was premeditated, as among others, it included also a roadblock to prevent reinforcements from coming to their rescue. Finally, yesterday, these 3 police officers were released 11 days after them being forcefully abducted, and after repeated calls from the international community for their immediate and unconditional release. Now, their forceful abduction, their illegal detention for almost 2 weeks, the brazen incursion into Kosovo's territory, the flagrant violation of the military technical agreement or Kumanov agreement, the flagrant violation of the border, the mendacity to really portray this as an incursion into Serbia in order to carry out an attack allegedly, the language by the president of Serbia justifying their abduction by saying that should Serbia's soldiers cross the border, they will not return. Each of these acts in itself is reprehensible and should be condemned in strongest terms. Now, we've been witnessing other deeply concerning attempts against our state in recent action by Kosovo police a couple of days ago, on 22nd of June. Significant amount of weapons and explosives were seized. This is military-grade arms produced in Serbia. Thanks to this action by Kosovo police, an apparent operation against Kosovo institutions was thwarted. And it's worth pointing out that this took place in the vicinity of the municipality of Zvečan, of the municipal building of Zvečan, where mayor has not been using that building at all. So he's discharging his responsibilities from an alternate location in a village. At the same time, Serbia's chief of army, in a menacing address, expressed readiness to carry out all the orders, as he said, and made direct threats with armed intervention against Kosovo's integrity and sovereignty, all under the guise of protecting Kosovo Serbs from a purported pogrom. Last night, there was an attack with a hand grenade at the municipal building in North Mitrovica. So what we see in the north of our country are Serbia's actions that constitute part of its hybrid operation to increase tensions, to incite aggressive rebellion against Kosovo. And as the scenario unraveled on May 29th, it showed that dissatisfied citizens are basically used as a cover for well-trained militant units under direct control from Belgrade. So this is a situation, and obviously it doesn't have much to do with normal relations between neighbors. And instead of moving in the direction of normalization of relations, it appears that Serbia, with all its capacities, seeks to continue trying to normalize force, use of force, and threats, be it against those who are not adhering the same political line of the current party or regime, and so on and so forth. So I will leave it here, as I know I've exceeded my time, but of course stand ready to respond to questions.
Thank you so much. And on that, just to tell the audience, we will be moving to the Q&A afterwards. So please use the Q&A function in the Zoom and we will address your questions later. To continue the conversation, we have His Excellency Mr. Marko Đurić, who is the ambassador of the Republic of Serbia to the United States of America. And prior to this appointment, Mr. Đurić was director of the Office for Kosovo and Metohija of the government of Republika Serbia. Thank you so very much, Mr. Đurić, for joining us today.
Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. I hope you can hear me. I wish to thank everyone who is dedicating a part of their summer afternoon for these difficult topics. And when I say difficult topics, I really mean it. For me, sometimes listening to stories about what's going on, it reminds me of that popular movie from 1993, if I'm not mistaken, The Groundhog Day, because we are speaking about topics, about issues that should have been resolved long ago. We are holding this debate 3,709 days exactly after the Brussels Agreement on Normalization of Relations was signed. And more than 10 years ago, we agreed upon certain principles of conduct between parties. In fact, for a while, we were actually, I believe, going in the really right direction. And we had institutions on the ground that, started being more participatory and being more inclusive of the members of the Serbian community. We had, for the first time ever, Serbs represented in local municipalities, in the police, in the court and judicial system, and so forth. And then all of a sudden, let's say about a year and a half ago, which coincided with the tragedy that unfolded with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the authorities in Pristina started to resort to unilateral measures on the ground aimed at actually unilaterally changing the situation to their advantage outside of the scope of the dialogue process. At the same time, they also publicly renounced the earlier agreements. That was actually part of the platform on which Mr. Kurti and his government ran on. When they were advocating for their voters to support them, and when they were gathering support, they were public and vocal about renouncing the main principles of the Brussels Agreement, including the formation of the community of Serb majority municipalities. And one must admit that in that respect, they were pretty consistent, because when they did come into power, they first stated that the dialogue was not their priority, that the community of Serb majority municipalities is some kind of a scarecrow which will undermine the otherwise unrecognized declaration of independence by not just Serbia, but a huge number of countries, in fact, the majority of UN members. Now, unfortunately, the authorities in Pristina resorted to what became dangerous escalations by starting to send special police units into the north of Kosovo. For those who do not follow this topic on a daily basis, I want to emphasize the fact that Article 9 of the Brussels Agreement clearly stipulates that the policing in the north of Kosovo will be done exclusively by a police structure which is proportional to the ethnic structure in the north of Kosovo. And by sending those special police units comprising mostly of former KLM members and certainly an exclusively monoethnic police structure, it created an environment which was conducive for further problems on the ground. Then what my colleague, Mr. Dugoli here mentioned, issues with license plates, again, unilateral measures, decision to, outside of the scope of the dialogue, ban the usage of Serbian license plates, stop and cease issuing status-neutral KS license plates, etc., etc. And now we came really into a situation which is for the Serbs on the ground intolerable. It is unbearable. The authorities in Pristina have actually blocked and banned even goods to pass the administrative line. They have banned now trucks carrying Serbian goods to supply stores and even hospitals, like the hospital in North Mitrovica, which is being supplied by oxygen from central Serbia. Even such services have been halted by the authorities. The aim of the authorities in Pristina at this time, with this campaign of arrests, intimidation, and also replacing mayors that would be representative of the local community with people who do not enjoy a support greater of 1 to 3%. The aim seems to be to try and abuse the support that Kosovo has enjoyed for a long period of time in part of the international community, in order to push that part of the international community that has long supported Kosovo into some kind of a standoff with Serbia. That is a gross miscalculation. This is nothing further from what actually can happen. Serbia is today a country that is not just open for business, which is clear from the fact that it was able to attract more foreign direct investments than many of the countries in the region. But it is also a country that is clearly determined to integrate fully into the Euro-Atlantic community. And we have already, our economy is already integrated to the degree that the unemployment rate reduction that we have accomplished over the past 10 years or so, and the infrastructure development and many other things develop very much on this relationship. And Serbia definitely does not want, and I think this is very important to emphasize, Serbia definitely does not want to escalate. So I would like our listeners and viewers just to take into account a couple of things with regards to this. Today, we are facing with the fact that the EU High Representative is calling on the authorities in Pristina to cease unilaterally doing arrests which are and detentions which are not based in judicial decisions. So to stop extrajudicial arrests. And this is a very clear sign that something is wrong there. The Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, has publicly and unequivocally condemned the authorities in Pristina for their unilateral actions. And what were their unilateral actions that were condemned? Well, the fact that they used force to install so-called mayors who were elected in elections in which less than 1% of the electorate in some cases supported them. And I hate to say it, but what is happening in Kosovo now is actually a groundhog day in the truest sense of the word, because what we are seeing now, we have already seen in Kosovo in the early 1990s, just with the roles reversed. So unfortunately, 3 decades ago, what is happening now to the Serbs in Kosovo used to happen, unfortunately, to the Albanians. 3 decades later, one would hope that things would go in an entirely different direction. So I just want to say that although we are in a much weaker position, although it's popular to say that Serbia is stronger here, which I don't believe is the case, because most of the time it is not Belgrade versus Pristina, it is what remains of the Serbian community in Kosovo against a very strong and cohesive government in Pristina. And on the other side, on the international scene, it is also not Belgrade versus Pristina, but the majority of EU countries plus US support Kosovo independence, and Serbia opposes. So what I want to say is that we are firmly committed to a peaceful and democratic way forward. And I will wrap up with this. I just want to say that what we believe is needed on the ground as a way forward is a return to status quo ante, which means the withdrawal of special police present in violation of Article 9 of the Brussels Agreement and their replacement with a representative police force, but in the meantime, replacement by KFOR and ULEX, who need to ensure, this is very significant, holding of free and fair democratic elections in which people of the north of Kosovo will be able to choose their representatives freely. Then we need to have the release of all political prisoners, because we have dozens of people who are in extrajudicial imprisonment in Kosovo. And also, I think that the rhetoric, the political rhetoric from the government in Pristina needs to be toned down, because the prime minister in Pristina, Mr. Albin Kurti, he labeled all of the peaceful protesters as some kind of a fascist militia. He said that half of them should be arrested and half of them should be forced to leave Kosovo. Well, Mr. Escobar, the US Special Envoy, clearly stated that according to KFOR data, more than 97% of protesters did not engage in any kind of violence. So we need to agree on how to resolve this question. And finally, the international community, in order for things to go back into normal channels of dialogue, needs to adopt a firm policy of zero tolerance for unilateral moves on the ground. Then and only then can we hope for stability to return to the streets of north of Kosovo.
Thank you so very much for that. I would like to thank the panelists again and to say that we're now moving to the Q&A phase of this event. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat and ask a question. And we already have some questions. So the first one comes from Exxon Kaludra, who says, in your capacity as ambassador to the United States, is it your understanding that the United States is aware of the criminal activity in northern Kosovo, or is it a matter of choosing to look the other way? I find it very strange that news of weapon findings and attacks with hand grenades have no effect on the international community. And to His Excellency Đurić, the same person asks, assuming the tensions hopefully will ease and the dialogue carry on, when the Association of Serbian Municipalities will be established, will Serbia then be willing to recognize Kosovo as a sovereign and independent country? Let's start with those, and then we will have more moving forward. Your Excellency Dugole, if you would like to address this.
Well, let me just say first that I have to mention this fact of replacing the mayors and being illegitimate, the ones who won elections and so on. I mean, it's really something that makes no sense at all, because as you know, there were elections held that were postponed. They were postponed in order to allow for those who want to participate to seize their opportunity and to vote for those that they want to vote. But in spite of all the extensions and the extensions of also the possibility to register political parties, Serbs under complete merciless intimidation from Belgrade who want to use this monopoly of political power and of one single party have stifled any possibility of others to participate. So we believe, of course, in democracy, and contracts could not be starker between the democracy that is functioning where there is rule of law in one country and let's say an autocratic regime, which is on the other hand. So that I think is really, really obvious. Now, as far as other aspects are concerned in labeling, let's say, mono-ethnic composition of police, Kosovo is by definition a multi-ethnic country, and one should go and read the constitution and should read the laws and all the magnanimous mechanisms that were put in place and that function there. Among others, these municipalities that are mentioning, some of them were created, were carved out so that they feel as majority. I mean, North Mitrovica, Gračanica, others, you name it. But Article 9 that Mr. Đurić mentioned, that does not stipulate what happens when an autocratic regime ill-advises or intimidates people to walk out and then to stay out of the institutions and not to seize the opportunities that they are there for themselves. And this is actually one of the significant differences from the point of view of Kosovo institutions and the overwhelming majority. There is no way that we can force anyone to participate in elections or to join Kosovo police or to join the Kosovo security force and other institutions. We encourage them, and of course there are many who take that opportunity. But on the other hand, you have violence, intimidation, hand grenades, attacks, murder of people who basically decide to join and to kind of move away from one line of a single political party that has monopolized through the links of criminality and other structures there. So this is the situation, basically.
Your Excellency, Mr. Đurić.
Well, I must say that I respectfully disagree with Mr. Dugoli on some of the things he said. When it comes to the walkout of Kosovo Serb representatives from the institutions in the north, well, that happened not during any previous government, but during this government of Kosovo, and for a very specific reason. Namely, they walked out of the institutions after such an amount of extrajudicial arrests and such an intensity of illegal presence of special units, which I believe people who follow various other conflict zones can imagine in what ways can contribute to creating instability in an otherwise also volatile area. So instead of getting the community of Serb majority municipalities, which the Serbs were supposed to get in return for being integrated into Kosovo institutions, they got former KLA members, armed gunmen, under their windows. And of course, they did not agree, did not accept to participate in such a rigged system against them. And let me just illustrate with another example in what ways the system is being rigged against the Serbian community in Kosovo. My colleague mentioned, the postponement of elections and, supposedly the authorities not being able to further postpone elections until a more conducive environment is being created. Well, we see on the example of the Dečani monastery verdict that the authorities in Pristina do not care what the constitutional court says, do not care what even their constitution says, and only apply it as a principle of, buffet table, pick and choose. They pick and choose what they like. They don't apply what they do not like. And also, it was mentioned, I think maybe I failed at least to answer the question that your viewer asked so far, so I will try to do it now very quickly. Regarding the situation regarding the so-called presence of criminal groups in the north. I want to emphasize that according to Kosovo police directorates, for 3 years in a row, Kosovo police region in the north was the most effective police region while the Serbs were participating. And that says a lot. When it comes to Serbia's position on the status question, that is not on the table now. We cannot discuss anything regarding the status of Kosovo while we have political prisoners, while we have armed gunmen on the streets of Kosovo, and while we have a government which is clearly stating that it does not want to fulfill the agreement on the association of the Serbian majority municipalities. A government that is acting against the advice of the Secretary of State of the United States, against the advice of the EUHR regarding the elections, a government that is acting against everyone's advice because the whole international community, that's maybe the unique topic in the world at the moment. The whole international community is asking the authorities in Kosovo to withdraw their special forces from the north. So we are very much interested in the resumption of the dialogue, but gentlemen, first implement your international obligations, release the political prisoners, stop the campaign of unilaterally trying to alter the situation on the ground. Things won't function like that.
Thank you so much.
I do have to say, first of all, there are no political prisoners, and to say that there are political prisoners, which really offends everybody who is following this source of a debate. Plus, you have to bear in mind that Kosovo is one of the most open countries when it comes to presence of international mechanisms and also independence of judiciary. So unlike Serbia's functioning, where you have an autocratic one-stop shop where the president decides about media, judges, appointments, even announces elections, results of elections. Because we do have mechanisms, and they function freely, openly, independently, according to their, laws that they are supposed to follow. That functions. So that means that they are mechanisms, they are tools, and there is no prohibition whatsoever, no obstacle for those who want to seize those tools. And if there is, let's suppose, a wrongdoing in any instance, like it may happen in any single country, then there is a procedure and there is a suspension, and we have cases like that where it happens. Unlike in Serbia, where you have people going and spending their time on prime TV shows, showing off how they have covered crimes and evidence as judges and investigative judges or prosecutors and so on. So that doesn't happen. Talking about the and other aspects and so on of non-implementation. First, we are always ready, and Prime Minister has expressed readiness also last week to respond to the invitation, as he did, to go to Brussels to meet. And of course, the President of Serbia was not willing to meet, and that shows how much willingness, readiness there is for the dialogue. When it comes to commitments or saying that this or that government and so on, every single government has done a lot and has fulfilled their own commitments, but it is sufficient just to look to the latest agreement that was reached in Brussels on February 27th and Ohrid then on March 17th, where before the High Representative, who now Mr. Juric is quoting and is speaking on behalf now also of the EU and US and all other institutions aside from Syria, where even before the High Representative could announce the results of that meeting and of the agreement being reached, the President of Serbia had repudiated the agreement and said specifically, clearly, that he did not accept the French-German proposal. He said that in Ohrid immediately. And in the meantime, every single article has been violated. So to invoke some sort of exclusivity or to give to association some sort of central role and importance and disregard every single other aspect of the agreement that clearly has been violated by Serbia since day zero of this agreement, not to mention other agreements like which were reached at the same time that this association was, or some even before, that are still unimplemented by Serbia. And in the context, there are such aspects that also affect, if you're not recognizing, let's say, diplomats, that's everything for a certain individual from Preševa Valley or others who has studied maybe in Pristina and cannot have a job. If you're one producer and want to, sell goods to Serbia and you don't have this recognition of customs stamps and so on, that's everything. If you are, I don't know, carrying out some other activity, but also if you have since 2011 refusal by Serbia to return the cadastral files, based on which maybe some decisions were taken, and you have socially formally, entities that previously were socially owned enterprises that are questioning even decisions of the Constitutional Court that they've initiated, then you have to follow that process. And we are a country of a rule of law where we have had even presidents step out because of decisions of the constitutional and other courts. So in that aspect, we follow absolutely.
Thank you for that. We have two more questions from the audience, one to His Excellency Đurić and then the other to His Excellency Duguli. So to start with Mr. Đurić, the question comes from Mirko Dautović. Pristina seems to be intent to play a game of brinkmanship by imposing its sovereignty on the whole territory of Kosovo, forcefully or otherwise. What can Serbia do if Pristina continues to suppress the autonomy of the Serbs in the north? And if Kosovo border guards establish themselves on top of Kopaonik, what can Serbia do?
Well, thank you for that question. I do believe it is very significant. And I want to say basically that Serbia is focused on a return to status quo ante. Sometimes you need to take a step back in order to make two steps forward. When I say status quo ante, I really mean what is basically contained in the calls from the European Union, the US, and other members of the international community on Pristina to withdraw its special forces, remove the so-called mayors, and start going back to the political process. If we accomplish this, then we won't have to worry about, potential implications of, undermine security in the north, and what would Serbia do, and what would, those special units that don't belong there do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all you need to know about the state of democracy at the moment in the north of Kosovo is the fact that there are mayors in place, some of whom gained less than 10 votes. Less than 0.1% of the population supported some of these people. And that's really about everything you need to know about the current state of democracy in the north of Kosovo. We want to see a totally different picture. My colleague mentioned, for example, he mentioned the cadastral records. That's, I think, for me, a very significant topic to touch on very quickly, because according to OSCE reports, there are more than 80,000 unresolved property cases of homes and apartments seized or illegally occupied by illegal tenants that belong to Kosovo Serbs and that have not been adjudicated. And the reason they have not been adjudicated is the fact that the authorities in Pristina have not formed what was envisaged as a joint agency for verifying and comparing the property, to which both sides would delegate an equal number of representatives. Instead, they created a monoethnic agency, which, of course, was boycotted by the Serbs, and hence, of course, the cadastral records are still unavailable to the authorities in Pristina, because we don't know what they would do with them. But this is just telling about the fact that we need to work towards greater confidence building, that we need to return the trust in the dialogue process. And the only way to do it is to actually implement what was agreed. Not to implement what was discussed in Ohrid, but to implement what was signed and ratified by a 2/3 majority in parliament in Kosovo, which makes it obligatory and mandatory for every government in Pristina. And by the way, when we speak about the community of Serb majority municipalities, it is definitely above, I mean, the obligation, the commitment to form the community of Serb majority municipalities is above, in terms of the hierarchy of law, above any existing and valid positive law in Kosovo.
Thank you so much for that. For His Excellency Dugoli, we have a question. How does the diplomacy of Kosovo react to the change of discourse in foreign, especially American and German media?
Well, we were close, and of course we take very seriously all the statements, communication. We of course have placed all our eggs in one basket when it comes to orientation, so that is very clear. And this is why sometimes perhaps it is just assumed that any agreement that is made between Serbia and the EU or others somehow automatically will be implemented from our side. So we work closely. We of course have no reservation, and we see eye to eye on basically almost everything. And even if there is disagreements, if there are ever disagreements, there may be not about, let's say, some wrongdoings, but about simple procedural outcomes of different institutions, because we have a division of responsibilities and decisions that simply have their own course of, let's say, action. But when it comes to this, let's say, statements about confidence building and so on, only 2 years ago, I mean, over 70 individuals were appointed by Serbian authorities in parallel structure, something that should have been dismantled a long time ago. And talking about police and certain ethnic identity of them and assuming that they should be targeted is unacceptable in every single sense, frankly. And set aside that for a moment, let's say, let's suppose that there are some issues, emotional or whatever, with the president of police. What about journalists? I mean, how can a president of a country go out and say that the presence of journalists is a provocation? Or go and then, when they are pushing people to man the barricades, say that they have nothing to do with that. But then later, a few months later, go and praise them, praise those who were masked, and single out also those brave ones who were unmasked, fighting and causing riot and intimidating individuals, including those of Serb ethnicity, because they are intimidating every single one. It's not that they are intimidating. I mean, one day it's police, the next day it's KFOR soldiers, the other day it's political opponent, journalist, media, and so on.
Thank you so much. I'm very conscious that we have 1 minute left, and I'm going to use it very wisely. There was a question: are you satisfied with at least one thing that has happened so far, like anything you could name as a progress? And if you could give like a 1 to 2 bullet point answers before we conclude. Let me start with you, Your Excellency Dugoli. In all of these years.
I mean, I really don't know. So I know it's a short time. Honestly, I don't deny that there were some incremental steps during these years. But however, as Senate Foreign Relations Committee has indicated, there is one side that acts in good faith and the other one that acts in bad faith. And this is why I think we are long past that timing for just incremental steps, while the other side considers that all these regions are somehow temporary states, as is hoping, as nurturing still dreams about Greater Serbia, or as they call it now, the Serbian world.
And Your Excellency, Mr. Đurić, in 1 to 2 words, would you say that any progress has been made in all of these years of talking?
I believe actually significant things have been accomplished. First of all, there isn't a war, and there hasn't been a war for a number of years. And more importantly, maybe even, is we have started to learn how to manage the disagreement, the clear disagreement that we have on the status and the questions of territory. And I believe that in the future, regardless of what happens in the short to mid-run, we will be able to accomplish an environment in which there will be all 4 European freedoms, the freedom of movement of goods, people, capital, and services applied. And I hope in the future that we will even go beyond that and forge some kind of a stronger relationship between Serbs and Albanians in the Balkans in general.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I know that there were many questions that we didn't manage to address, but this is a very good start, and hopefully we will have so many more events like this. Your Excellency, Mr. Ilir Dugoli, thank you so much for your time. Your Excellency, Mr. Marko Đurić, thank you so much for your time on this very important and pressing conversation. And thank you everybody else for joining, tuning in, and asking your questions. I look forward to continuing this conversation. And in the meantime, follow us on Twitter and